Welcome back to this next tutorial. It is going to be covering the text tool and layer effects. There's no specific reason why I've combined the layer effects tutorial with the text. The layer effects can be applied to any object on a layer, but I find the text is just the best element to illustrate what the effects do. So let me open up a file here. This file will be on your disk and under text samples and your exercises. So I'm going to open up this layer file, and it's going to give an illustration of some of the things you can do with text in Photoshop. I'm just going to update my fonts. You may be missing some of the fonts, so you might just have to say update fonts as well, and just substitute your fonts with whatever you have available in your system. As you can see here, you can curve your fonts, you can put your image through, shining through your wording, put a drop shadow on it, a glow on it, whatever basically you want to do, you can do to your fonts. Another aspect that isn't illustrated here that I'll also go over is multi-lined fonts. In other applications you might have typed paragraphs and wanted to set your line, the distance between your lines. Your leading is what they call it. So I'm just going to wipe all these out. I can delete multiple layers at once by selecting the top one, holding the shift button and clicking the lower one, and then just drag and drop those in the trash. So I'm going to trash all those layers and start on a clear background. I'm just using a burger just so you can actually see on some of the effects I apply. You can see some kind of background. If it was on plain white, it wouldn't be quite as effective. So it's just going to help me blend things. So I'm going to select my type tool. As I mentioned before, there's multiple type tools within this type tool menu. I don't really use the others. I just use the type tool as it is standard. With each of these tools, I'm sure I've mentioned before, you have a toolbar at the top here related to that tool, and also you have a palette related to that tool as well. So if you can't find your tools here, which is these two windows or two palettes indicated here on the right hand side, if you can't find it there, you can always just go to your window and select character. Well, it's a bit more difficult here because it's not actually named text or type. It's called character and paragraph. So that'll be your character selection. If I select character, this one will come active here. So this will also add specifics. Like I said, most of the stuff I'm going to use is up here, but when it comes to multi-lined text, I can adjust the distance between the two lines or your leading. I can adjust the kerning, which is the distance between your letters. Also illustrated here, you can set presets, or you can manually type in a specific setting that you want by selecting the box there. You can adjust the physical width of each letter, 100% of its size. You can change the color of your font here, or you can change the color of your font at the top here as well. At the moment it's set to the foreground color, but a quick way to change your font is just by clicking on this here and selecting a color. I know I always end up choosing blue, but it's just coincidental. Okay, the settings, crisp or sharp, doesn't really make a difference. I haven't really noticed much difference in these selections. I kind of just leave it on whatever the default is. I haven't changed that much. And whatever fonts you have available loaded in your system will come up here when you select this menu here, so you can choose any font that's loaded in your system. Okay, and then once you've selected the family of fonts, you can select the variation of that font. So it'll give you italics, bold, italic, light, whatever the variations are available for there, with an example of what that font would look like. Okay, so those are all the tools related to it. Your font size is always in points. You can adjust it here in the palette, or you can adjust it up here in this pull down menu. Also there's standard sizes you can select from, or menus put in a specific size. At the moment mine's set to 10.95, so I can come to my page, I can click anywhere in my not on my copyboard, but in my artwork area. I can click anywhere with the text tool to then create a text layer. A text layer has got a little T on it, which indicates that it's a text layer. You can't do anything else other than type on this layer. So once I've created this text layer, let's just put in here chips. I'm going to type chips. and I'm going to select the move tool, the item tool here, and it will then go out of the text selection. So if I click on this layer now, I can then move the text around. I'll show you now if I select a brush and I want to paint on this layer, it won't allow me. It's going to show a little no entry sign because it's on a text layer. If I select another layer, it will then allow me to paint on here. Let me just reduce the size of my brush so I can paint on here if I wanted to, which I don't want to, so I'm just going to undo that. Control or Command Z to undo, and we are just working with text. So going back up to my text window here, I can either, to change this text, I can either double click on this little window here until then select that type and convert my item tool back into the text tool. So I'm going to double click and it's back into text. There's my text tool over it, so I can now do whatever I want to do to my text tool. Alternatively, I can just select my text tool here in the tools bar, and I can go over my type and just click on it, and it will then reselect my type, and I can put spaces in it or whatever else I need to change to it. Okay, I want to change the size of this type, so once again I can either select my type. If I click on it, so to select the entire text, I can just double click on it, and I can come up to the type tool here to change my size, my font size, and I can select whichever size I want. So I'm going to select a nice big font. I want to make it a nice bold font, so while it's selected I can come and change. Let's just make it Helvetica, keep it Helvetica. I'm going to make it bold. Well, Arial Black is a nice solid font for these purposes. Okay, it's nice and chunky, and I can select out of there. If I don't really know the specific point size that I want my text to be, I can also transform my text. By transforming it, it's not going to pixelate it because text remains as text. So I can go up here to edit and free transform or command Control T, and it'll give me the same little windows, little handles that I get when I'm transforming any other object. So now I can drag. If I don't hold my shift key in, it's going to distort my type. So if I hold my shift key in, it's going to jump back to the right proportions, and I can drag the chips as big as I want it and just hit enter. You'll see it's still typed. If I double click on here, I can still type it, so I can still change the text. So transforming it's not going to rasterize it, which converts text to an image. Okay, so that's different ways of upsizing it. Before I get into the effects of things, I just want to show you all the type tools. So I can once again select this. I'm going to call this, I'm going to now add text in here and just call it burger. Enter and enter. So it'll be burger and chips. As you can see now, my type is all on top of each other. So I can select all my type by saying Control or Command A, and I can go and increase my font size, my leading. Your leading should always be bigger than your point size. So it's 140, so it must be at least 140 or bigger. So let's say 140 point and see what that looks like. Okay, I don't have to put the PT in, it's already in points anyway. So 140, and you can see how it's now spread it. I can have it a little bit closer together if I want. Let's make it 130. Let's make it 100. See, it's now touching. So we can say maybe that's the look I want. Let's have it touching burger and chips. Okay, it's now left aligned. So everything's running down the left hand side here in a straight line. I can select it all again. And these are my elements here to change the alignment of my text. So I can center align it. Whenever I change the alignment of my text, it's going to use this point as a reference point. So wherever I started typing from, if my original alignment was centered, it'll use the center as a anchor point. And when I hit left align, it will jump to move all this text over to where the center was. So to illustrate, I type this with left align. If I change it to center align, it's going to shift it all to the left, but it's going to be centered. So I can move it out this way. You can see now everything is centered. Okay, and selecting it all again, I can change it to right aligned, left aligned, center aligned. Okay, so I want the center aligned, and there it is. Okay, so I've gone over your alignment, I've gone over your other options here. I can move my text closer together. Let me just illustrate that. I can just minus 100%. It's going to reduce the spacing between the letters. I can increase the width of my letters. So that will be the same as transforming it without holding the shift key down. So that's 200%. If I change it back to 100% of its actual size, so that's what the font is designed as, I can come in here and use my transform, Control, Command T, and by dragging it on, not in the corner, but just by dragging it on one of the edges, I can then fatten it up. So that's pretty much the same thing as making it 200% here. So if I hit enter there, the only problem is now it's still registering it as 100%. So I've actually distorted the type now. So even though it's 100%, so if you want to distort the type, maybe it's better to do it here because you can revert it back to the original size. Reverting it back to the original size via the transform tool is going to be more guesswork because I don't really know where it was. It's going to be just hitting this more or less there. Okay, so if you're visually designing, the transform tool is perfect for resizing things. Otherwise, if it needs to be a specific size, you go into specific instructions or dimensions, you can adjust it via this. Other tools related to your text under character, you've got your strike through. It'll just put a line through it. If you want to illustrate that your English isn't too good, you can put a line through it, so it'll then show you've crossed that out. As part of a marketing gimmick, you can underline text with this little tool here. Let's just put it on the bottom so you can see the stroke. You can create a subscript or a superscript. It's kind of like you use cubic feet, that little cube sign, or a degree Celsius, that little degree sign. Let's put a degree sign in here, so it'll be 60 degrees Celsius. So that looks like a 600 degrees Celsius. So I'd select just this little 0 here and say I want a superscript, and I'll put it up at the top like that. So it'll lift it up, and well, basically as the little illustration shows you is exactly what it's going to do, and that would put this little degree down the bottom. This will be small caps, and that'll be all caps, so it'll make everything full caps. So if you've typed this in multiple cases, lowercase and uppercase, you can force it to all caps. Italic, that's if your font that you've selected hasn't got an italic option. Like this one has an italic option, but if it hasn't got an italic option, you can force a false italic. It'll just skew it a bit. So you just select your type, remember to select it, and you say italic, it'll then force the italic. So although the font doesn't have that option, you can create that effect by selecting that little selection there. Same with the bold, you can actually bold your type too. Okay, so let's minimize the amount of text I have in here again. It's a bit too much. Okay, and I'm going to bring back to the burger here. Okay, going on to some of the effects we can create. An option that I'm not too sure that I've covered with regards to layers is the opacity and the fill. The opacity is the, I don't know how much of the layer you can see. So the lower the opacity, the more translucent or transparent your layer becomes. And whereas with the fill, it doesn't affect the layer, but it affects the content of the layer, if that makes sense. So your layer is still visible. With fill, your layer will be still visible, but your content won't be visible. So if I lower the opacity, let me start with opacity, I'll make that 0, you'll see my burger will disappear because the whole layer has been made invisible now, basically. I'll make that 100% again, and I'll change the fill to 0%. Okay, visually it doesn't look any different, but let me illustrate where this would come into play. Okay, so I'm going to add an effect to this text. I'm going to put a little shadow on it. So adding an effect, I'll come over to my layer here. You can either come into layers here also, and you can say layer style, and you can add a style onto it. Or the shortcut to that would just be double clicking onto the layer itself. So double click on the layer to open that window up, and you can check on whatever effect you want. Personally, I'd rather just click on the word because that'll check it and select your options at the same time. because you can check it without actually selecting the options. You have to actually check on the word to bring up the options related to that effect. So I'm just going to do a drop shadow for now. Looking at the selections, all these options for the effect are very similar throughout all these effects. I won't go through all of them because, like I said, the options are very similar in the way that they work. You can basically set your effect via these. Now your blending mode will be on multiply because it's a dark element, so you want it to overlay on everything below it. Let me just go over something so it's not, I'll put it over some image so you can see the effect that it has. I'm going to double click and go back into my effects, go into drop shadow, and I'm going to, you can see a slight little black edge onto that burger wording now. I'm going to increase the distance of that shadow from the word, so I'm going to change the distance. It's pushing the shadow further out from the word. It's still a bit of a hard edge, so I'm going to use the size to soften that shadow. Okay, the spread is basically going to add how dense it is up to the edge of that shadow, so it'll bring in the density again of the shadow and make it thick basically right to the edge of the shadow, which you don't really want. I don't usually play around with the spread too much, but that'll just, if your shadow isn't dense enough, basically you can add the density by changing the spread. So now this multiply, I'm just going to push the shadow right out away from the top, just so we can see what it's doing. Okay, so with the multiply function on, I'm going to drop this opacity here. That's how dark, or how translucent the shadow is. I'm going to drop the opacity. You can see the shadow gets lighter and lighter. Now you can see on the shadow, the image is showing through the shadow, and that's the effect of multiply. If this is on normal, it would just be black. Let me increase the density again. Okay, so it's just a black on top of there. By multiplying it onto the layer below it, it's now blending it into the image, so you can see parts of the image coming in through there. Let me just zoom in here. I can still see image inside of my shadow. On normal, it'll be solid, and you'll have no detail inside there, and it's look kind of flat and grey, whereas multiply will add a realism to it. In your layer or your blending modes, it's the same as the blending modes that are shown here on your layers. I think I've gone over blending modes with your layers. The same options are available in both of these. You can see they've cordoned them off into relative functions or styled functions. So all of these in this area here will darken onto the lower layer. These ones here will lighten. Whatever you're putting on, whatever effect you're applying, it will lighten the effect. And these are more subtle effects, and then these are quite drastic and different to, I mean, it's almost inverse effects to what would show via normal. Okay, so multiply, because it's on a dark element. The shadow is falling to the bottom left now because this little circle here is telling me how my lighting looks. At the moment, the lighting is coming in from the top right and down across the item. So that's why the light is up here, the shadow will be the bottom left. If I change the lighting to the top left, the shadow will be on the bottom right. Okay, there the shadow moves to the bottom right. I'm going to bring the shadow in a little bit more again. I'm going to drop the opacity. Okay, so I can affect how the light is falling on my object by rotating this little arrow, or this little arm on the circle around. I could even be shining from the bottom if I wanted to. Now there's this other little checkbox next to this. It says use global light. If this is checked on, any other effects I apply, you'll see throughout all these effects it's got a little lighting effect on it. Any other effect I apply, it's going to apply the same lighting for that effect. If I switch this global light off, I can then adjust this lighting independently. So I can then have my inner shadow coming in from, or the light from this side here, so the inner shadow will be in the top right hand side. You can see the little inner shadow there. Let me increase the distance of it. I can apply more than one effect, as you can see. So I can bring my inner shadow in from that side, but then I can go into my drop shadow and not use the global lighting and bring the shadow in from a different angle. So if I use global lighting, it's going to match the lighting style. So the light will be coming in from the top right, which means you'll have a shadow this side and a shadow below. So by matching your global lighting, you actually create a sense of realism. You don't have all those different light sources. If you look at something in a room, you don't have 200 light sources all giving different shadows to different objects. So by matching or using a global lighting, all of your elements will have the same lighting on it, which will help with the realism of it. Now I've added a glow on it as well. You can see the little white highlight there. I can increase the size of that too on my type. So that's the glow effect. You'll notice also now that the glow is a yellow tint. That's the color that's been selected for the glow. I can change this color and I can make it a green glow if I wanted to. Nice harsh green glow. So now it's a green glow, and it's on screen because it's a light color and it wants to radiate. It's actually washed out the background behind it to give it that glow effect. It's on a lightening blend, so it's on screen. If I put it on multiply, it's going to give a really dark shadow rather than a glow effect. So you can see let me just increase the opacity on it, increase the size on it so you can really see it standing there. Okay, so this is multiplying. It's darkening the edges around it because it's combining the green with whatever's underneath it. The screen is going to basically blow out that from the background, so it gives it that nice glow to it. So that's something to remember. If you're using light colors, use your screen. If you're using dark colors, use your multiply. Same with the shadow. You can give it a different color shadow if you want by selecting that little block and choosing a different color shadow. So okay, and your shadow will go green. Green not being the most dominant color. You can see it there. Okay, so so those are your basic functions of effects. Now I'm going to turn off some of these effects and just show you something that's really cool. I'm going to go back to my drop shadow. I'm going to make it black again, just so it's nice and dark and bold and noticeable. And I'm going to drop the opacity slightly. Okay, I'm going to bring it in closer to the word. And I'm going to say okay, I'm happy with that shadow. Okay, so maybe I don't want this big blue burger word over my burger because it's kind of dominating my image. I want to be able to see predominantly my burger with just a hint of what that word says. So what I'm going to do, if I change, this is where the opacity and fill comes in. If I make the opacity 0, it's going to wipe that layer clean because it's basically making the visibility of that layer 0. You can see everything's gone. So I'm going to change that back to 100%. And instead I'm going to change the fill. Now what the fill is going to do, as I explained, it's going to make the content of that layer 0, not the layer itself. So I'm going to make that 0 and you'll see the shadow will stay behind. So the content, which is a text layer, so the text itself is made to 0, it's just transparent, but just the effect of that layer is still visible. So that's quite a nice little effect you can do, is to make your image come through so it almost looks like that word has been punched out of your image itself. So that is the great advantage between opacity and fill. Now an additional adjustment you can make to your font, if you go back to your font tool and select your font, just double click, select everything, there's another little tool here on an arc. This is going to let me distort my text, not in the transform way to resize it or squash it or stretch it. I'm going to be able to actually put it on an arc or some other shape. So it's a warp text tool here. So it starts out by none. As I select, each of these little illustrations here will basically illustrate what it will do to my type. So from doing an arc, it's going to now bend it upwards, my burger wording. I can adjust the intensity of that bend by modifying these little sliders here. So at the moment it's 50% up. The more I flatten it out to the center, it's going to bring it down. Once it gets to level again on 0, it will be as it was before I started. If I continue to push the slider to the left, it's going to invert the warp on that, the arc on that. Okay, in conjunction with that, I can then add distortion to it. So I can, depending on left or right, which side I want to distort bigger or smaller, I can adjust that in the vertical distortion as well. How big, so I can kind of have like a I don't know, Back to the Future kind of signage or Star Wars signage that's scrolling out the screen. It's kind of coming out towards you. So once I'm happy with that, I can say okay and click off there, and it's now created this distorted wording. Once again, the wording is still wording, so I can change this to chips if I wanted to. It's going to remember all of the settings that I've set for it. If I like the dimension of this and I want to add once again a burger and chips, I can duplicate this layer by clicking and dragging it over to this little create a new layer icon. I drop it on there, it will create a copy, which I then can double click and I can type in here burger, and I can then drag that up. So it's kept the same style as the chips distortion. So if you don't want to recreate the distortion, you can duplicate the layer and then retype whatever you want into that. Alternatively, you probably just burger, enter, and enter chips. Okay, so you can either add text to it, or for whatever reason maybe you wanted to create this additional layer because you want to change the effect on it, or you wanted to increase the fill on it to say 20%, so you got a hint of color coming through it again. You didn't want this layer to have a fill in it, but you want this one to have, so you can separate them onto different layers. So whatever you're using for what you're doing, you can change and adjust your fill. As you can see, it's now showing through because it's only 50%, so it's half translucent, half transparent. I can basically make my image visible by dropping the fill down, or I can keep it at 100% and change my blending mode to soft light. You can see it's got a blue tint through it. I can make it a bit more harsher by saying overlay, or even more harsher by saying multiply. So you can still see parts of the image coming through. So you can use all of these effects combined into each other, interwoven between each other. There's nothing that you can say I can only use this effect here. You can combine your effects to create your final result. And that's pretty much all there is to layer effects and text. Like I say, you can apply these effects to any kind of layer, whether it's an image or text or whatever it is. Keep in mind, if I have a solid picture filling the entire copyboard here, like this burger is, if I add an effect to this, you won't see it. Let me just add a drop shadow to it. I don't see anything happening here. I can increase the size, increase the distance. I still don't see anything. It's because the effect is now falling off of the copyboard. So in order to see that effect, I would have to transform Control or Command T onto that layer and drag this layer a little bit smaller, and then you'll see the shadow on that layer. Once again, the checkered board in the background is just illustrating transparency. It's actually not really there, it's just telling you that that piece is transparent. So to really get a good visualization of what this will look like, you can create a new layer and fill it with white. So okay, and just drag it below your bottom layer, and you'll better see that shadow that's on that layer. So like I said, if you're creating an effect on an element rather than on text, just make sure that it falls in your page so you can actually see that effect on it. These effects also work with masks, so if I add a mask onto this layer and brush out a portion of this image by using my paintbrush, let me just put my caps lock off. Caps lock changes your icon on your brush to little crosshairs for more precise work. I like to use the circle so I can actually see where my brush is going to brush out. I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller, and I'm going to use the black on the foreground for my mask. I'm going to brush out a portion of this. I'm going to give it a hard edge just so I can see the shadow occurring on there, because not painting white onto this burger. So if I cut a piece out here, it's almost as if I'm literally cutting a piece out of the image, because you can see the shadow coming in there. It's the same shadow that's applied onto this layer. So as you use a mask on a layer, it will also still apply the effect to the layer. So if I go in here and adjust the effect, you will see that shadow will increase and decrease and move around inside there as I adjust this. So it actually shows through, so you can add dimension onto your layers as well, by making it look like your layer is actually standing off the page. And that is pretty much text and layers. Have fun!